In this lesson, we will be finishing up our setup of the database with Prisma. So we're going to be doing two things. The first is initializing Prisma and our database. And then the second is adding in our seed. And so this seed data will be the course data so that we can actually use our application and we don't have this empty database that's completely useless. So first we're going to install Prisma. Do that with pnpm add-g Prisma, which will install the CLI tool. We'll also want to install the Prisma client itself. Now, what Prisma does is actually pretty interesting. So instead of installing a client that everyone uses, what it actually does is it takes this client that we just installed, and with the CLI tool, it will go through our schema and generate a custom client library. And this library includes all the different types that we have so that it's developed specifically for our application. So if I run Prisma generate, then we can see that it has generated our client to this location here where we asked it to in our schema here. So it's in node modules and then a .prisma folder. So it means you have to scroll all the way to the top here. There we go. It just wasn't scrolling up. That's what I was missing. So here we are in our .prisma/client folder. And so it generated this file for us. And so this isn't actually important for us to understand or to see, but it is interesting to know that when we come in here, it's going to generate this for us, and it's all custom based on our application. So you can see that we've got this chapter with all the different fields from our chapter model, as well as our course model and our lesson model here. Ooh, okay. Yeah, the lesson model here. So it custom generates this for us. And so that's an interesting way of getting around this problem of creating types from our schema. So by doing this, we have access to all of these types. But what this also means is that every time we change this schema, we need to rerun that Prisma generate so we can generate a new client for us to use. Okay, so now we have our Supabase database set up. We've got our Prisma schema set up. We have our Prisma client generated. But if we come over to our Supabase project, and we open up this table editor on the side here, you'll see that there are no tables available in this schema. So we haven't actually done anything with our database yet. In order to do that, we run this command, Prisma migrate. And there's a few different commands off of this migrate command. We can use a reset command, we can use a dev command, and a deploy command. So reset will reset your entire database. And this is useful in development if something got messed up with your database or you just want a fresh, clean start. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Then dev is what we want to use in development, and deploy is for when we've deployed our application. So we would run deploy on a continuous integration server where all it's going to do is update the database. What the dev command does is actually a bunch of extra stuff to make sure that our database is going to work properly. So it does things like making sure that the migrations are going to be consistent, that we haven't done anything weird with our Prisma schema that's going to break anything. And it does this with some fancy stuff. It creates a temporary database in the background and run some things against it. But really, the important part here is that it generates the migration and then runs it, whereas the deploy command only runs the migration. So if I run this command, we'll see it generate that migration. So we have to enter a new name for this. We'll just put init because it's the first one. And it tells us that it's created this migration in migrations folder. So if we come over here to our file explorer, we can see that it has created this migration. So what is a migration? Well, it's a SQL file here. It's a SQL file that contains all of the instructions to run against the database. So you can think of migrations as Git commits for your database. It keeps everything in sync. And if you need to reset your database or do any changes to it, it keeps track of that in a really straightforward way. So Prisma generates all of this SQL for us, but you can see that it's creating the chapter table, creating the lesson table, and doing all these different things like linking the lesson to the chapter and all that kind of stuff here. And so this is important because the migrate dev command will create this migration. And then once you know that this migration works and is correct and isn't going to break anything, then on your continuous integration server, the migrate deploy command will simply run this migration against your production database. Okay, so we've run that. And so if we come over to Supabase now and we refresh, we should see our tables in here. Yes, so we've got all the different tables and they have all the different columns here that we were expecting. And Prisma created a fourth table for us. And basically what this table does is it keeps track of which migrations that this database has performed already. So this is useful because you might have different databases in development, in staging, in a testing environment, and in production. And you want to be able to know which migrations have been run and which haven't yet. And so this is also useful for resetting. You can do things like rolling back a migration and then reapplying that migration. If something kind of went janky, then this table keeps track of all of that for you. So you don't have to worry about it. And Prisma will handle all of those details. Okay, so now we have our database and it's set up, but it's completely empty. Obviously, this is not helpful to us because we need data in our database if we're going to use it at all. And in our case, we need all of that course data in the database. In other applications, you might have default data in the same way, or you might just want to have some dummy data in this database for development purposes so that when you spin up a new dev environment, you have some data to work with so you can start playing around with the application and developing it. Prisma makes this really easy, and it has a seed feature built into it. So basically, we need to add this field here to our package.json, and then we create a script that will then be run by Prisma. And this script will use the Prisma client to add data to the database. Then Prisma will automatically run this seed function or this seed script whenever we reset the database or initialize it or anything where we might need that seed data. So we're going to create our seed file in the Prisma folder. So we'll call it seed.js. And this basic function here, what we're doing is we're going to call this seed function, which is an asynchronous function. We're going to wrap this in a disconnect so that once this is done, or if it errors, we're going to disconnect from Prisma. And then we'll use the Prisma client in this seed function in order to generate all of that data and add it into our database. In order to generate data, you can use a library like Faker.js here, which gives you a whole ton of different objects that you can randomly generate addresses or images or different kinds of animals. You can randomly populate colors, all sorts of things. Basically, anything you can imagine is in here. And this is great for dummy data in tests or to just get something to use in your application so you can start working with it. In our case, though, we actually have something a lot easier, and that is this course data.json that we actually have been using so far. So we could, as described in the docs here in the Prisma docs for seeding a database, we could go through each individual object type, course, chapter, lessons, and then generate each of them individually. But we can also just pass in a JSON blob, and Prisma will automatically create those nested objects for us. So this is copied straight from the course data.json, but I've had to actually add in a little bit of some changes here. So when we get to the chapters here, instead of putting in this array directly, we have to nest it inside of this create so that Prisma knows to create all of these objects as well. And then when we get down to the lessons, a similar thing, we need to create each of these individual lessons. And we're actually not using this course value, so we can just get rid of that. And so now we have our seed script. If we wanted to, we could get fancier with this and we could combine this with Faker. We could create dummy data for our text, video IDs, URLs, all that kind of stuff. But we already have this dummy data, so we'll use this. The next step is to go into our package.json file. And we need to add a new Prisma field here. And this is what Prisma will look for when creating the seed data. And it will run this command to generate that data. Okay, so now all that we need to do is run that seed file. And if we do Prisma migrate reset, it'll completely reset and then reapply all the migrations to our database. So in this case, it resets it, completely blows away everything we already have, which is nothing. And then we'll seed the database once it's gone through all of the migrations. So we'll say, yes, we want to lose all our data. And it has been successful. Now, if we refresh, we should see all of that data in the database. Okay, so if we look at our chapter table, we can see that we've got all 3 chapters here. We can see that we have this foreign key that links to the course ID because they're all part of the same course, so they're all going to be 1. We can actually click on this and it will take us to the course, which is TypeScript with Vue. So if we look at this course table, we can see that we only have 1 entry in here because we only have 1 course, but we can add more if we needed to, and we could expand this application to have multiple courses. Similarly, we have all of our lessons in here. The IDs are unique, numbered 1 to 11. We've got the titles and the slugs. We've got the number. So this is the number within that chapter. And then if we come over here to the chapter ID, we can see that they're linked to the different chapters that they're a part of, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. So now we have our data, and in the next lessons, we'll be able to rewrite our endpoints so that instead of fetching the data from a local JSON file, we'll actually be fetching the data from this database.